Jay, how's it going?
Hey, Jason.
So I'm Jason Rosenberg. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here to introduce my good friend, comrade, J.W. Walker, and we're going to talk about the power of protest and the queer movement in general. Jay.
Hey, Jason. So glad to be here with you on Logo to talk about the power of protest. We've known each other for years now through our work with Reclaim Pride and Queer Liberation March. So it's going to be super fun to talk.
Okay, so for those that don't know, what's the Queer Liberation March? What does it mean to you? Why did we have it?
The Queer Liberation March is a movement by a lot of queer activists, LGBTQ activists in New York City to get Pride back to its roots. Those of us who helped organize it, I think that we looked at what had become of Pride on Pride Sunday, and we saw something that was incredibly corporate. We saw something that was way over-policed, and we felt that it was time to get back to the garden, to go back to the original Christopher Street Liberation Day March, which happened in 1970.
So I want to get back to you, and what were your first plantings of protests?
Yeah, I grew up in a movement household, in a civil rights movement household. So the idea of protest has always been something that has been in me. And the first time that I was really activated was in the late 90s, in the fall of 1998, when Matthew Shepard was murdered. Then I worked in the AIDS world for about 10 years for Gay Men's Health Crisis. And then the Pulse nightclub shooting happened and became one of the founding members of Gays Against Guns. And I kind of have been in the activist space since then. What about you, Jason?
I feel like I was always involved, like since high school. With my plantings were like with Amnesty International. I even interned with them, and from there, ACT UP New York kind of radicalized me with queer people, whether it's part of our healthcare, housing, any of the issues that are so broken. We have these mutual aid and protection networks that keep us safe, that keep us alive, and I think that has always been a part of queer history and part of protest.
Yeah, I agree. It exists because we had to create that sense of community. Generally speaking, queer people don't have their parents to identify. They don't have their family members to teach them, to bring them into the community. So within that realm of finding community, inevitably some voices get buried or don't get the attention that they really should have. From your perspective, Jason, who do you think that kind of gets lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, one of the unsung heroes that I think really changed the game of how we elevate and center Black trans lives and Black trans liberations and Black trans stories is Monica Roberts. And she really reclaimed the story of Black trans lives with her website, Transgriot. And through that, we are finally uplifting Miss Major, who is a longtime activist, whether it was being at the Stonewall in 1969 or her continued work with people living with HIV and her continued commitment to fight for the most marginalized and to always be a voice of leadership.
What's really inspiring me right now is the prison abolition movement, the defund movement, the reapportioning of funding away from police and towards social services. Like in the last 3 months, I've seen the words restorative justice in print more than I have in the last 4 years. When I look at activism, when I look at the work that we do, I always think that the smartest way to move forward is to always try to focus on the needs of the least among us. If you focus on the least among us, then you will uplift everyone. So there's protests, there's activism, and then there's change. And the two don't come hand in hand. How do you judge the success of an individual protest or a protest campaign?
It's definitely really hard to judge success. We have to think of it as an ever-growing, ever-evolving movement. And even like with ACT UP, for instance, we're now in the 33rd year in the fourth decade of the epidemic. We did change a lot. but we're still even fighting the same grievances that we had in 1987. We're fighting pharmaceutical greed. We're fighting housing justice. We're fighting incarceral justice. We're fighting so many things that are like still exist. We need that continued rage, that continued energy. And I think if anything, this past summer, a lot of these folks that were new to organizing or re-energized for this new wave of protest had that energy. So for all the youth or anyone who is new to protests or organizing, what are like some tips that you could give to them as far as etiquette, as far as being an ally? What are some just like quick tips?
I'd say that the first thing is when you come to a protest, if there's a group that's holding a protest on a specific issue, if that issue is not your personal issue, if you are not the person who is under threat by this issue, listen. The thing to remember is that when organizers are at a protest, when organizers are putting on a protest, they're working.
Yeah, this is labor, that they are taking the time out of their lives and sometimes out of their full-time work to be there, to speak about their experience. They don't need to be doing that, but we need to give them thanks and gratitude by funding them, whether it's supporting bail funds, whether it's funding organizers. There's always a role for everyone.
Yeah, there are many roads. There are many roads to the goals of activism, and they don't necessarily all have to be out in these streets. What do you see as the positives that have come out of this year, Jason?
We have found through organizing, through a pandemic, through living in a fucking fascist state, that we have found coalition, that we've found community, even new community. We have new organizations that are popping up, whether it's Warriors in the Garden or our weekly Stonewall protests. So we're finding new ways to engage with each other, to coalition build, that is really just based on community.
For me, it's the youth. It's these young, particularly youths of color that have come out in this moment of reckoning. I love that they have captured the leaderless movement. Historically in this country, leaders of those movements get killed or get incarcerated. And they've gotten smart, these kids. They understand that. And they are working around those realities in a really powerful way. So that's really exciting me about this time. Well, Jason, this has been a great conversation. Thank you. This has been really enjoyable. I've also enjoyed reading the spines of all the books behind you on your bookshelves. I recognize many of those books. I've read many of them, so it's been kind of fun.
And thanks so much, Jay. It's always great to hang out with you. And I know obviously we'll see each other on Zoom again and in the streets again. So thanks so much for spending this time with me.